another episode of the Revolutionary Social Work Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Alicia, and I am here with Ace today. And we have the pleasure of being with Alan Dettlaff as well. If anybody has been following the podcast or the prison social worker, you may have seen speak with Ace before, but I have not had the pleasure to speak with Alan, so I'm really excited today. And if you're not familiar with Alan, he is a professor, an author, abolitionist. He helped to create the Upend movement, and we'll post a link to that so you can check it out. And they're doing great work to abolish the harm that's happening within the family policing system. So, welcome, Alan. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing really well, and I'm happy to be here. I appreciate you all inviting me to be part of your podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And just in case some people in the audience are not familiar with the work you're doing, can you just give us a brief background on who you are and what's happening at the moment?
hmm Yeah, I'm a social worker, and I started my career working in what many people call the child welfare system, what I and many others now call the family policing system. Um, and I worked in that system for many years and then spent many years working outside the system, trying to reform the system, particularly because of the system's longstanding, decades-long problem of over involvement, over surveillance, over representation of Black and Indigenous children who are part of that system, who in the foster system. Um, because of that, I spent many years working trying to reform the system, trying to address issues of how racism impacts decision making in that system. And then simultaneously, I had the opportunity to invite Angela Davis to give a presentation to my students in 2018 and started reading some of her work, learning about abolitionism and the long history of abolitionist theory, and started thinking about how that could apply to the child welfare system, or really realizing how everything that I was reading as it applied to prisons was comparable to the child welfare system. And when we think about the kind of world we would want to see without punishment and racism and oppression, the child welfare system is a big part of what creates that. So I and several others started working on an abolitionist project, which we launched in 2020 called the Upend Movement. And Upend broadly seeks to end the use of forcible family separation as a response to mostly poverty, but also harm on occasion, and instead look at ways to respond to harm, respond to poverty in ways that don't create further harm by forcibly taking children from their parents. But Upend also tries to connect our work to other abolitionist movements. I think abolitionist work is really just one big movement to end carceral systems, carceral spaces, systems that cause racism and oppression in society. So to the extent we can, we try to connect with other movements that are working towards prison abolition, policing abolition, abolition of ICE, involuntary mental health services. And then, obviously, abolitionist work also connects to global issues of oppression. So we've also been active in advocating for Palestinian liberation because Palestinian liberation has been part of abolitionist work for decades. So we think it's important to connect all of those things together.
Yeah.
It's interesting where kind of our stories intersect because it was really I was at the University of Hawaii and Angela Davis was with us for the whole semester, teaching our course,
Oh, wow.
and it's really what I mean. I was already involved in certain things, but it was really she just has a she has a level of I don't know intelligence, intellect that and further than that, like empathy
Mm.
hmm
that really superseded any other individual that I'd ever been connected with before. And so she
hmm
really launched, me. I started working with political prisoners like Batulu Shakur and the MOVE organization and all of that, and it just opened my eyes to a lot of different things in the world that I live in, if you know what I mean. So
hmm
thank thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah, that's really
Thankfully,
it's really similar. I was same, active in social causes and social justice work, and just I didn't have the language of abolition, or like the exposure to it. I had probably heard about it in passing, but just hadn't really studied it and taken the time to understand what it was really about. And that was what sparked it, hearing her talk. And I mean, that really radicalized me in a number of ways.
Yeah. And the connection between everything, like you say, this isn't just abolishing the carceral systems or the family policing system. It's all connected. It's this
Mhm.
huge powerhouse. Yeah. And I think I saw you the other day, maybe it was yesterday or the day before, you posted an image that said fight the enemy.
Fight the real enemy. Hmm.
The real enemy, and talking about like people on the right fighting refugees or immigrants or trans people, and people on the left fighting Trump, and but nobody actually fighting the real enemy. And I just thought that was so powerful. Like it conceptualized everything in my mind that I've been thinking about and put it in this visual and how you explained it. But I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit, because I think this goes with the abolition movement and of all of those powerhouses.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I think about all the time, and I've tried to write about when I can. Um, I think the the most powerful people, or one of the most powerful tools that oppressors have, is distraction. So like you said, powerful people on the right try to distract their following by creating villains, demons,
Mm.
which right now are immigrants and refugees and trans people. Powerful people on the left try to create the villains, and those people are mostly Donald Trump and what they would call the right wing movement and his supporters. But all that really does is distract us from the much larger problems of empire and imperialism and capitalism, which are destroying the planet, robbing money from all of us to send bombs and weapons to Israel, and maintaining this global system of capitalism that the elite do everything that they can to maintain. And I think, there's a lot of energy right now, as there should be, to resist Donald Trump. Donald Trump is certainly a danger to all of us. But I think one of my concerns about the resistance to Donald Trump is that resistance for many people means removing Donald Trump from office and electing Democrats.
Exactly.
And should they be successful in doing that, then they'll just go back to their business and think that everything's fine. And in the way I look at things, nothing has changed. The Democrats support all of the capitalist, imperialist, genocidal policies that the Republicans do. There's really no daylight between those things. So none of the bigger issues that are oppressing hundreds of thousands of people around the world and in the United States are resolved by electing Democrats. Um, Democrats still, even during this most recent election, still actively support genocide in Palestine, would be supporting it right now had a Democrat been elected to office. And not to mention unwavering support of the police and prisons. So all of the issues that um, I and many other people try to address as abolitionists are not solved at all through electoral politics, or at least not just by swapping one party for another. So that's why I try to talk about, that's to me what fighting the real enemy is about. It's not to say that Donald Trump is not an enemy, but removing him doesn't resolve the much larger problems that we have to be fighting against.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think for a lot of people I've spoken to, people kind of see that and kind of do feel that, but they don't know where to put their energy and how to act. And I think an obvious place to put energy is fighting Donald Trump. And so that's a lot of the people on the left, right? Okay, I don't want war, and I want peace, and I want more equality among all peoples. But then, okay, it must be Trump. Trump is the enemy. I'm going to fight that. And so it's where do we put that energy? And we've had these conversations too of how do we how do we get that energy and put it into action that actually is going to matter and be meaningful, and not just elect somebody else that is going to do the same thing?
hmm It's really hard because in some ways it's hard. In some ways, I think it's important to try to identify practical, real world things that we could be doing.
Yeah.
But it's hard in the sense that we have all, in the U.S. at least, been socialized to think that a two-party system is the only thing that we will ever have. And I think the Democrats rely on the idea of voting for the lesser of two evils.
Mhm.
That's the only way they get elected. But what does voting for the lesser of two evils over and over result in? It's the building up of evil over time. A lesser evil is still evil. And that's not who we want making these big policy decisions for our country. And I know the idea of, and we could talk about it, is electoral politics even anything we should be spending our time on? I'm not positive about that. But if you are to engage in electoral politics, imagine if everyone who thinks that genocide is wrong voted in the last election for a presidential candidate who was against genocide, and there were candidates running who were against genocide. Imagine if everyone who thinks genocide is bad voted for one of those people. But that doesn't happen because people are so afraid of what will happen if they don't vote against Donald Trump in this case. But there will just be another Donald Trump-like person in the next election. So I think we have to, if we're going to engage in electoral politics, figure out ways to build a movement that is outside the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party will never resolve our problems.
Yeah. And that's the problem with the social work too. I don't know if you were going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a part of it. I honestly was very, very discouraged during the last election cycle. Obviously, I don't want Donald Trump in office, and I think he's been a super jerk, and more than a jerk, but you know what I mean? Sometimes he says some things that I'm like, good God, how can that come out of your mouth? You know, like calling people he doesn't like Palestinians or something like that. And you know, the press conference he had, they're going to take over Gaza and turn it into a resort or something like that. That shocked me a little bit. It shouldn't, but it did.
Yeah.
But when I think back to the election cycle, and even going back to a little bit further, after the incident in Israel a couple years ago, and was it October 8th? Is that the date?
7th.
Anyways, October 7th.
October 7th.
And I had to go. I was at the university at the time, at University of Alaska Fairbanks, working on campus for that year, and my office was like on the 3rd or 4th floor. So I had to walk up the stairs, and they had TVs there. And on the TV every single day, I had to sit and watch state TV, Anthony Blinken, whatever that other guy's name was, but just justifying what they were doing over and over and over again. And I had to watch that.
A power just go out?
You're back. You went black for a minute, but you're back.
We're back.
Hold on just a second. It's got a big warning here.
This isn't even on.
Oh, so we just don't have. We'll just have to roll without the sound.
Wait, it's here.
Oh, just 1 second, Alan. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. If it matters, I can hear you perfectly. So.
Yeah, we'll just keep going without. Let's just go without it for now.
Yeah.
Yeah, rather than starting it back up.
Okay.
But it says the recording has stopped. So just 1 second.
Okay.
All right. We are back. I believe you can hear us.
Yeah, it looks even better than it did before.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll just leave off
roll with
the
it.
mics.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just saying that having to watch state TV and the justification over and over again, and then, like you said, it was like anytime that I wanted to be critical of the Democratic Party and what they were saying, and you know, how many times did I have to hear them say they unequivocally support Israel over and over again? Pretty much everybody. You had, you know, top dog Democrat Ben Shapiro signing bombs or signing missiles or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And whenever I would criticize the Democrats, especially from the social work community, I would be attacked essentially as either a Donald Trump supporter or enabler or racist. And I just I mean, I think that sometimes those attacks that people had on me, it hurt me, because I try so hard to do the right thing, and I'm not saying I'm always right or that I always do enough, but I try really hard, in those areas, and people, it's full of violence. The comments that people had sometimes from the social work community.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at social work organizations like the NASW and CSWE, and I see even internationally, I see Dr. Paul Michael Garrett and from Ireland and Joe Hanley in England, and they're talking about how the international organizations and the organizations over there are also, basically the equivalent of what the NASW is doing. I was invited to the NASW conference, and it was cool as far as unity for social workers and all that, but they didn't mention Gaza at all. There was there was nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And
Mhm.
I just feel really, really discouraged in the larger social work community and some of the organizations that govern us, that I just don't feel any hope really in it, that I think there needs to be complete revolution in that regard, or some other kind of organization that comes up. You have any thoughts on all that? Like what, as far as the larger
Yeah.
social work community?
Yeah, I mean, many. I've had very similar experience as you just described, and I was very critical of Democrats, particularly after October 7th, 2023, when the genocide began. I was very critical of Democrats. I was very critical of Joe Biden, and when Joe Biden dropped out of the race and was replaced by Kamala Harris, I was similarly critical. Their stances didn't change. Their stances were not different at all, but the response to my criticism changed. And I, lost many friends, acquaintances, colleagues, because of that stance, against Kamala Harris and against Democrats broadly, with very similar comments, that I was a secret Trump supporter. I mean, my therapist stopped seeing me because of my saying that I was not going to be voting for Kamala Harris. And said that if I didn't support Kamala Harris, then I was not an ally for people of color, and stopped seeing me. I mean, that's like the level of that it got to for me, which was pretty harmful for me at the time. So I mean, I've seen that kind of response in social work, outside of social work, and I have always tried. I've not been successful in this always, but I've tried to not like vote shame people. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm doing that now. I understand many of the reasons why people voted the way they do. I understand the fear of Donald Trump. I do. For me, I was not supportive of Democrats prior to October 7th, 2023, because of their support of the police and prisons. But I think my conviction or commitment to never supporting them again was firmed, seeing their active support of genocide and their active support of Israel. When it comes to social work, I always say that how disappointed I am in social work, and then I always think, just like you, that why am I continuously disappointed? The social work response is entirely expected from a profession that has been a carceral profession since its inception, that relies on the maintenance of poverty to stay in business for the most part, that has prioritized professionalization, and the pursuit of degrees over what actual social work practice, what helping people should look like. I think for me, where I've got to with it is that social work's lack of response lack of any statement whatsoever condemning genocide or condemning Israel. It's disappointing, but it should, for many of us, also be clarifying.
Mm.
What we know now, if we didn't know it before, is that social work's commitment, supposed commitment to social justice, to racial justice, is entirely a performative stance. That when actually confronted with something that the profession should be standing up against, the profession, as represented, say, by its professional organizations, National Association of Social Workers, Council on Social Work Education, as well as schools of social work, as represented by social work deans, have all been entirely silent. It clarifies for us that their stances on social justice, their stances on racial justice are surface level, if not entirely performative. And, we saw that during the defund the police movement, where social work organizations were not critical of the police. In fact, NASW kind of famously, shortly after the murder of George Floyd, put out a statement praising social work's long history of collaborations with police and vowing to strengthen those collaborations. Social work was in NASW particularly put out a statement in support of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that was being proposed in Congress at that time, even though the movement for Black Lives was very vocally against that because it was just surface level reforms. So we saw them not really take a social justice, a racial justice issue seriously in 2020, when they could have aligned with the movement to defund the police. And there were me and many others who were calling on social workers and social work organizations to say, this is enough. This has reached the tipping point where we can say we've tried to collaborate with the police, we've tried to bring about change from the inside, and it just didn't work. We are going to end our collaborations with what we know to be a harmful racist institution. Social work chose not to do that, and they chose to double down in their support of the police. And now we see the same thing happening with complete silence in response to the genocide in Palestine. So I think it should be for us clarifying. I think that what really bothers me, I can accept that social work is not really committed to social justice. I mean, I think we have to at this point. There's been so many examples of it. What's still disturbing to me is I think the hypocrisy when social work continues to act or make statements about their support of social justice and racial justice. And I can see over the next few weeks, schools of social work posting on their social media channels their commitments to social justice and racial justice and their missions and their new initiatives that they're launching. And again, now I think social work is just exposed. It's exposed for what it is. I wrote about in the post you just talked about, I wrote about the United States government being exposed for what it is, really. I think a lot of us who are radicalized become radicalized, or part of our radicalization is when we understand that the government's been lying to us all our lives. Well, and right now that's the opposite is true. The government is telling us the truth, and it's right before our eyes. The government is literally murdering children, supporting the famine of hundreds of thousands of people. So the government is exposed as a murderous, genocidal institution, just like social work is exposed now as a profession that really does not have a commitment for social, racial justice, and I think should just own that. Social work should, and I'm sure there are people who disagree. You all might disagree with me, but I think social work should just own that it is a profession that has moved to one that largely just cares about training clinicians to provide mental health services, other services that are very needed in society, but that it is not a commitment that has either roots or current commitment to addressing issues of social, racial, economic justice.
No.
It's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't feel good to it doesn't feel good to say that, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
We're training case managers and therapists for the most part.
Yeah. I totally believe that there is a place for therapy. As a therapist myself, it's super important, but
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
put high focus on it. It is a distraction away from where we could put energy on these more macro levels. And I think also what I feel, and I think a lot of people do within the therapist clinician space, is fear to talk out about these things, because there is within organization, there's a expectation or an assumption that everyone just feels the same way. Everyone's a Democrat, everyone supports this. And so the fear of saying anything different, you could lose your job, you could lose your colleagues, your friends. There's just such fear there. And I felt that. And I cannot believe that we're getting that fear from our own organizations and our own,
Or even just as bad,
supporters.
you might just meet silence, like you never even said
Yeah.
anything, or you never even, do you know what I'm saying? Just
Mhm.
complete
Yeah.
ignoring you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I get,
Yeah.
the biggest, the most emails, let's say, that I've received that are complaining about my podcast were when we've talked about Gaza and Israel. And when people write me, they typically write to me like I'm stupid, and that if I just were a little bit smarter and more privy to the reality of it, then I would be okay with what's going on. And I don't even know how to respond to the people when they talk to me like that.
Yeah.
But it's, again, I think even the silence, it's like it feels like it's full of violence in the way that they talk to me, and I'm about as privileged as I can get at this point, so I don't really have anything to worry about myself other than my own values and my own integrity, and I'm always, I shouldn't say I'm always, but often I'm at a loss on what can I do about it. What can I do other than talking?
Yeah.
So I think that what Upend Movement and what you all do, Alan, and the way that you talk about it, I admire you, and I admire the courage that it takes, because it's, I mean, again, there's no real consequence for me other than people shunning me or something like that, or I guess I could lose a job, but I could always find another job. But the way that you all go about it, and without any shame, I just really appreciate you all, and it gives me hope, and it lends me a little bit of courage.
Yeah, when you see other people doing it, that's what helps with that fear and gives you courage. Because, and I think that's an important part of what revolutionary social work is about, is because we know there's people looking for something different. And so when they see anybody doing something different and speaking up, it does give other people courage. And yeah, we feel that with your work. And yeah, I don't know what else.
I feel like that I've seen more social workers support Ludacris winning that award at the NASW conference or whatever it was, than I have seen talk about or be critical of something like the war, the genocide in Gaza. And I'm curious, Alan, why do you think that we're so desensitized? I mean, all of us in America, but in the West, whatever we want to say, but especially in social work, how can we be so desensitized? Is it that we've seen it on TV all our lives and in the movies all our lives? Is it that we've been, there's been so much erasure? Like when we were talking about this earlier, oftentimes when I meet with an Indigenous elder or something that I think people are going to be really into, it almost gets ignored too. And I think part of that is because there's been so much erasure that people just can't even see it, if that makes sense. And I feel like that's what's happening over in the Middle East right now, or, not just right now, but since the beginning of our time. And I think that what astonishes me a little bit is what's different. I've been reading books about the FBI and the CIA and, the way they went against communism and stuff like that, but they didn't have real-time videos and photos to see all this stuff. And you have that now. So how do you still become desensitized and ignore all that? I just don't understand it.
Yeah, I think it can probably be explained a number of different ways, and I certainly don't want to make it seem like I have an expertise on how that happens, but I do think it's partly a history of dehumanization of Palestinian people that has happened for decades. And I think for people in the United States, we've also been socialized really since birth to only care about problems that impact, on one level, other people who are in the United States, on another level, people who share our identities. You know, it's very hard for people in the US to pay attention to, have empathy for struggles, issues that people on a global scale are going through, for one thing, because it feels removed, and we've been trained to um, have like a xenophobic view towards the US and care about other Americans, and problems happening here at home. But I also think there's just a larger um, problem with the way we've been taught to think about empathy or solidarity. I think for many people, it is difficult to care deeply about problems that they don't have a personal connection to, or a personal tie to, like an identity connection to. Um, and I think it takes both empathy and political education about what's happening around the world, political education about structural forces around the world that are causing racism and harm and oppression. Um, and not everyone is able to get that throughout their lives for lots of different reasons. But I think the inability to feel solidarity with people who we don't share identities with is where a lot of the real problem is. But then going back to social work, I do want to say, on one part, I understand where the fear comes from. Um, and I'm always hesitant to, again, to try to, or I go back and forth with this. I really do, and I'm not consistent on it. On one level, I am angry and disappointed at everyone in the social work community, particularly people in leadership, powerful positions, who have not spoken out against the genocide. And sometimes I've said, there is still time to speak out about it. And if you choose to speak out about it now, those of us who have been speaking out about it will welcome you into the fold as someone speaking out about it. But on the other hand, more recently, I feel less and less like that since the famine began, because it's at a scale now where I just can't. I don't think that I think that our concern, and particularly people, I think particularly people that have platforms, particularly people that have audiences, that have some influence, should care more about their authenticity and their own commitments to humanity, to put aside, to over or outweigh any fears that they have. And on one hand, I can say that because, like you said, Ace, I have enormous privilege. I've already lost a job because of speaking out. There's not much more that can happen to me. But for me, I think that my authenticity is the most important thing that I have. And to the extent that I have, within this small world of social work and social work academia, to the extent that I have a small platform within that, I think it's important for me to use that to speak out and encourage other people. So I don't want to sound like I don't understand the fear. I've had that fear at different times earlier in my career when I was dean of a college of social work. But I think things are at a level where our personal commitments to humanity, to not wanting to see a forced starvation of hundreds of thousands of people should be outweighing it at this point. So I'm angry at the people who are not speaking out.
Yeah, no, so true. And we have someone on Instagram commenting, African Seema. This may have gone back a little bit, but I'm going to read from the beginning. Said the commitment to decolonizing social work is often individual, not institutional. Most of us are in private practice because we couldn't practice in ways that are aligned with social justice in institutions we worked for. Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But you've got to understand that colonialism has always relied on silence, demonizing, and erasure. And I think it's because the people who often speak are usually the ones who are already oppressed and burnt out. It's often hard to serve from an empty vessel. 100%.
Absolutely.
In a bit more, we understand collective liberation, so all global genocides matter, although some are more trending than others. It's a Western thing. In collectivist societies, people are modeled that human solidarity. He says, is Alan feeling and thinking the same about genocides in Congo and Sudan?
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think it's important that, as social workers, as abolitionists, we should also be elevating the genocide and the trauma that's happening in Congo, in Sudan. I think there has been more emphasis on Palestine because of the exposure that we see, the images that we see through our social media feeds. So it's like kind of constantly, it's inescapable. At least, for me and probably for other people who follow the same kind of social media feeds that I follow, to see the death and destruction in Palestine every day, whereas it's still not as easy to see every day what's happening in the Sudan and Congo. But I mean, I'm glad, I appreciate it being raised, because I think it is important to continually lift that up. There's not one genocide that's worse than another genocide, and we need to be talking about and using our platforms to bring attention to all of them. Absolutely.
Yeah. And like you said at the beginning, everything is connected, because we're talking about abolition from this larger sense rather than just focusing on one area. And, something that always sticks with me, and I bring this up a lot, is when I was corresponding with Eddie Africa from the MOVE organization, when he was incarcerated, and talking about these struggles that we have of seeing certain systems and wars and genocides and all of this around the world, and how do we make any difference within this little bubble that we're in. And he just reminded me that you cannot do it within the system. You have to let the system burn and crumble and build from outside of the system.
Mm-hmm.
And that's overwhelming too, but I think it's very true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about that when it comes to child welfare or the family policing system. My view is that social workers should remove themselves entirely from that system and work from the outside towards its evolution. I don't think, as I mentioned before, I don't think the idea that change could come from the inside is a realistic idea. I think particularly in carceral systems, I mean, the carcerality of these systems, literally these systems, policing, prisons, child welfare, are based on centuries of racism and white supremacy that have built the foundation of these systems. Social workers working in those systems is not going to change the very design of those systems, which is to harm and oppress people of color. But I also think that what you just said about burning something down is true when it comes to social work. And I think we need to start talking about that more broadly. I sometimes think that the idea of decolonization is overused, in the sense of, and I'm sure you're familiar with the paper, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. But I don't think we talk about that enough. Like, it literally is, decolonization is what Frantz Fanon wrote about in Wretched of the Earth. And that's what we need to think about when we think about it. I mean, it's different scale, obviously very different scale, but social work is not going to change. I don't think anymore that social work is going to change. I don't think it's possible. Like, I was thinking earlier today, about the title of your podcast. I don't think that there is. I think that there are social workers who are revolutionaries. I think that there are social workers who are abolitionists. But I don't think it is possible for social work to be revolutionary or for social work to be abolitionist. And I think that those of us who have the values of revolutionaries, of abolitionists, need to think about creating something entirely different outside of social work. When I think of what social work should be, I think about the Black Panther Party and the work that it did to literally feed people who were hungry. That's what social work is to me. That doesn't require a degree. It doesn't require a license. It requires a real commitment to justice and to helping people without an expectation for something in return. And we don't have to do that within a profession where we know that we're not valued for the work that we do. So I think the idea of burning things down, which is a metaphor, but like just destroying something, is the way that we need to start thinking about social work.
Yeah, I assume when you're saying social work, you're talking about the profession of social work, right?
The profession, yeah, as an idea, as a profession, or at least removing ourselves from it. Like we were saying before, there is value to therapy. Obviously, there is value to some of the case management that's done. I think if we were to do more work to eliminate poverty, we wouldn't need as much of the case management that's done. So yeah, or therapy. So I think problems of capitalism and racism lead to all the problems that social workers are in many cases working on. So if we could work towards ending those things, we would need social workers less. But I think that the idea that social work can be revolutionary, abolitionist, committed to social justice and racial justice, we just know not to be true now.
Yeah. It's something that I've thought about long, and we've talked about is reclaiming it from what social work has been reduced to, because there's the profession and there's just the term social work, and what is social work, and the way that we define it. Like, you go to a history of social work class, and most of them are taught the textbook style. You're going to start with Jane Addams and all that. But did social work, did people really doing social work start with Jane Addams? I don't think so. And I would like to see it broaden or take back, maybe reclaim that word social work to where it's not just when you acquire your MSW and you get your license and then you go out and now you're a social worker. Even me, people call me a social worker now, but really if you're talking about professional wise, I'm an educator who educates social workers. And the best social work I ever did was before I ever really even knew what the actual term was.
Before you had a degree.
What the profession was.
Yeah.
Working with kids and just doing it, working from the heart and helping kids out. That's when I was really doing social work. But lots of people wouldn't have considered me a social worker at that point because I didn't even know what it was.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what's been so just amazing about the podcast so far, is that because social work being beyond just the formal profession is one of our core values.
Yeah.
We've been able to talk with musicians and people working on the street who don't have degrees and see the work they're doing and highlight their work. Because like you say, that there's so many people doing social work from the roots that don't have a formal degree and it's not needed. And how do we get back to that? But the NASW doesn't help in the professionalization and standardization of our field. It's
even further though, the Council for the Council for Social Work Education, CSWE, whatever it is. As a professor, they in really interesting ways, there's a lot to keep you in line. You're always up for reaccreditation. So you always have to be worrying about that constantly, or you're going to have it taken away and then you don't have a program anymore. So it's reasonable for a department to be concerned about that. But when you're in that constant state of reaccreditation and there's no way to really broaden it, most of the stuff I do in my classes just fall outside of that stuff. I just do it on my own, if that makes sense. The governing body is just making sure that I'm adhering to each one of the competencies, if you know what I'm saying. And they don't really care if I'm really embodying social justice, or they really don't care. It's just about, checking these boxes here. And by continuously doing it, it's like the whip keeping you in line over and over and over again. So I empathize with social work programs. Even if you want change, it can be really challenging when there's only one avenue to get where you need to be able to train social workers.
Yeah, and that avenue exists for CSWE to stay in business through the accreditation fees that it charges to be reaccredited. So it entirely depends on that process happening over and over and over. So the schools have to pay literally like thousands and thousands of dollars. I don't remember what it is, but it's thousands of dollars to be reaccredited. I wanted to mention, just and I'm interested to hear your thoughts too. Like, I agree with everything you're saying about like this idea of reclaiming. I don't know that we can reclaim the name social work. To me, it's just been harmed. The identity, that brand, has been harmed too much. And I'm sure like communities all over the country that are scared to death of the idea of a social worker in their community, a social worker knocking on their door. So I completely agree. Like the reclaiming, I don't know that we could call it social work.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I don't know either.
Yeah. And a lot of like this creation of what revolutionary social work is now started as a conscious party. And we did like we've done a lot of different things with a conscious party, from a radio show, from having events in talking about abolition, and having talking circles and all of this stuff. And yeah, and we kind of fell back into social work because there was a lot of people asking for, where else can we turn? But it's a really good point, reclaiming that word, that phrase. The connotation of it for so many people is harmful, is a turnoff.
I had a friend of mine, comrade of mine, Hockey Shakur in Virginia. We've had him a couple of times, but one of the times I was chatting with him, I asked him that question. How do the Black people in your community, do they trust social workers? What do they think? And he's like, shit, we don't at all. I remember exactly what he said, but he's like, no, not at all. Like, we're actually fearful when you talk about social work and whatnot. And so I think just to contrast that just a little bit, one thing that does give me a little light and hope is my students. When I present revolutionary social work and the ideas behind it to them, it's really, I'm actually really surprised in a sense of how much they embrace it and talk about it. And, white students, Black students, Indigenous students, and they're like, this is what I've been waiting to hear. Why doesn't anybody else talk in these terms? As you're, because I think that they get into education and it's not what they imagined it would be or what they hoped it would be when they come in. I went through that same thing. When I got done with my MSW, I stood in front of my cohort and we had to say what you learned. And I said, I learned I didn't want to be a social worker anymore.
Right. I hear that a lot from my students.
I think students are the young people. I guess they're not all young. Some of them are older, but they are looking for that. And I think we become, again, desensitized or numbed down to that through going through the educational process, because, you've probably taken out all these loans to go there and you're so highly invested, and you get to say an MSW program, advanced standing, and you don't have time to do anything because you get taken 5 graduate classes, an internship, not to mention take care of yourself and your family. And then when you get done, like you went through, and you realize, oh, I still got to pay for licenses and do all this stuff and wait on this. And then I have to have a job that's going to allow me to pay those things off or to continue, with it. And so it's like a dead end street. And I don't know why this is one of the baffling things to me is that really the only way that we can produce social workers, is to put people in debt and put them through these, this system that just drains them to the bone. You know what I'm saying? Like, so when they're done, they don't have much left to give. And then when they do, they got to accept that advertisement to see 30 clients a week to make the money to pay it back, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And so is there really no other way that we can produce social workers, if you know what I'm saying? It's almost weird to say it that way.
I think that's the lie we're told, though. There's no other way.
Yeah, I think about that myself all the time too. I really do. And in some ways, I think I don't know if there are other ways to do that within a system of capitalism, because people in the way our society is now, people have to get these degrees to get jobs, to make an income, to just literally have a place to live and to be able to afford to eat. I think all the time, how can we start something that provides political education to people who want to be more involved in activism, social justice work, that is not about having a degree, but also doesn't cost anything for them to get it. Yeah. But how do you do that in in these structures that we're confined in. And I mean, I'm in the same position. I'm not in a position where I could quit my job and start a free school about political education for people. I mean, I can't. So I think it's within these confines of a capitalist structure. I don't know that it's possible to do that. And social work has, as well as many other disciplines, has a monopoly essentially on the profession, and deciding that the only people who can be social workers are people who have these degrees. I know there's even some states, I believe Texas is one, where I am, where you can't even call yourself a social worker if you don't have a social work degree. And that's been part of the professionalization effort that NASW has spearheaded for years. So I don't know that it's possible to do that. I wish that some of us could figure out a way to do it.
Yeah. And that's the reality, because a lot of us, we're in the same boat. We have to work these full-time jobs and then do the work that the activist abolitionist work on the side. And know that the full-time job is exhausting, but it's the only way for us to sustain. And then it drains our energy, and we lose energy for the other stuff. And I think so many people are in that boat. But how do you still stay true to your values within your profession now? How do you work with the students? And I just wonder what advice you have for people in similar situations.
I agree completely with what you were saying, Ace, earlier about students being kind of the hope and the light that I see. I've similarly seen, I would say particularly, I think since 2020, there has been a shift in social work students, and not solely because of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, people who came before them, and then the defund movement in 2020, but the shift, the conversation that opened up within social work, the conversation from abolitionists that has started to happen within social work. I think students, and probably largely because of social media, have been very rapidly exposed to abolitionist ideas and content, things that they haven't been before. People like you, people like me, talking about that in our classes. I find that students really want to talk about and learn about abolitionist ideas now. I think one of the biggest disconnects in social work education is that professors do not want to talk about that, and are, for the most part, do not want to talk about that, and are not educated enough to talk about it. Even if they were asked to, I don't know if they could. I hope that shifts over time, that the more students demand that kind of education, those kinds of conversations within their classrooms, as more emerging professors get into social work academia, that understand abolition, have studied abolition, that those conversations happen. And maybe there will be some shifts within social work. Again, keeping in mind the entire idea that I think the ultimate solution is for social work to end entirely. But I think, for now, until we get to that place, what I usually tell my students who, just like you, Ace, are by the time they graduate, they realize they don't want to be social workers, or they don't want to be associated. They want to do the work that they went into social work for. They don't want to be identified with a profession that they had now come to view as very oppressive and harmful to a lot of people. I usually say, to think about the reasons why you got into social work in the first place, what drew you to it, which is usually the desire to address some type of social problem, provide help to people in a certain way. If you're in a system already, ask yourself, is that system I'm in doing that? Not just me, but is the system I'm in doing that? And then use that as a barometer to make decisions about the future direction of your career. Because I think there are many spaces in social work that cause a lot of harm, even if individual social workers in those spaces do good things with their caseload. I don't think that's good enough. And I think, that's how we need to be thinking about what we do with our careers. Is the system that we're in doing what we got into the system for? And are we able to really make the difference that we want to make within that system? I think about that myself often. Systems of higher education are incredibly harmful, racist institutions. And I would like to figure out a way for myself to get out of that harmful racist institution. But I know it's hard. It's hard to do that, and it's hard for people who are working in other kinds of systems to get out of them. But I think the moral compass is looking at that bigger system and seeing is that system doing good, or is it causing harm?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just wanted to do a shout out to if any social work professors out there. One way that you could implement these kind of things is, intro to social work. In one of your modules, do one on liberatory social work, do one on revolutionary social work, do one on abolition social work, etc. You know what I mean? Add those in there. And if you need help, I'd be happy to help. I'm sure Alan would be happy to help. I'm sure Alicia would be happy to help. There is some African SEMA had a couple good points again in the chat. There's a lot of message here, but they bring up liberatory social work, which I just mentioned. And if you're not familiar with that, check out brother KD, Kyle Toon. He's got a Substack and some other podcasts and some things that he's doing with his vision of what social work should be. And like I said, African SEMA said that believes that social work can be reclaimed. Going back to that the topic that we were talking about a little bit ago, and they say, just like Western psychology is inherently Eurocentric, community psychology and liberatory psychology can go exit with revolutionary social work, but that's what reclaiming is. Just like liberatory and community psychology exists beyond Eurocentric and mainstream psychology, we can decolonize social work and reclaim it. And they say reclaiming is about restoring the field to being about human first. Systems aren't arbitrary. They are maintained and upheld by individuals. I think radical acceptance is realizing that you can make a difference to the people that you work with.
Thank you, African SEMA, for sharing your thoughts, for sure. I think it's just important to have dialogue on this. I don't think there is a clear right or wrong on this, but we have to talk about it.
Well, I think the good point they brought up is the Eurocentric part of it. Yeah. And that we often, so you'll hear social work talk about marginalized communities a lot. However, when you go to a social work textbook or a social work thing, it seems like the exact same thing is often done. And it's there, but it's put in the margins or it's a special section. Yeah. Why isn't, like Afrocentric perspectives, lenses, why isn't it centered, if that makes sense, or indigenous? Why isn't it centered? Another thing that I mentioned that I noticed about the NASW conference again was that there were no, Afrocentric elders or no indigenous elders there to guide us. It seems odd to me. Yeah. If you know what I'm saying. I guess it doesn't seem odd to me, but it seems like we could find a lot of wisdom and a lot of direction to take by listening to the elders in that regard, and by looking at an Afrocentric worldview and seeing like how can we, like when we talked about Ubuntu yesterday with Shayla. Yeah. Those things are, again, if you hear Ubuntu and social work, it's going to be on the margins. It's not going to be centered for the most part. It seems like if we could do that, then we would be able to broaden ourselves in a way, to maybe shift the path that we're on. But I'm curious, Alan, because we're going away from social work. What are we calling it? What kind of ideas do you have in that regard?
As to what to call it, gosh, I don't know. I think the bigger is, I don't know that it has to be called something. Yeah. That it has to be called a thing. It's people helping people unconditionally, caring about other people, and providing help when help is needed without an expectation of something in return. I think we're so stuck in these ideas of a profession. That it has to be called something. I don't know that that's the solution to it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think Shayla Dubé on the podcast yesterday was talking a lot about when she grew up in the village, and it was so everyone was just helping each other, and it was people would knock on your door if they need food. There was no one living on the streets because everyone would help each other, and it wasn't like they all called social workers. They would live in community with each other.
Mhm.
But we have such an individualistic society here in America,
Mhm.
and many other Western places, that it's almost weird to live like that.
Mhm. Yeah,
Really?
we're trained to be that being independent is the goal.
Yes.
But,
Yeah.
like Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, abolitionist work is about radical dependence on other people. That will bring about the society we want.
Yeah. Radical dependence. And that's a huge shift in people's mind, to be dependent, because we are. It's kind of the American dream, to just be able to support yourself and raise
Absolutely.
yourself up
Hmm.
by doing your own work. It's a
Mhm.
huge shift for people to get out of that. And I've seen that a lot within social media, kind of mainstream social work paths. Of There's this huge
Absolutely.
push of, I totally agree that there's a lot of times practicing in private practice can be so beneficial to get out of these organizations that are harming, and they're very
Mhm.
oppressive and difficult. But then, are we going into that more individualistic path again, in doing the work and just raising ourselves up that way? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but
Yeah,
it's hard.
it's always going to be a constant struggle as long as we're existing within capitalism, because
Mhm.
we all have to do what we have to do to literally to have a place to live and to eat.
Right.
And then makes everything about a conversation like this difficult to have. But again, we could go back to how we started the conversation. If you think electoral politics is a way to change things, then we can stop voting for people who are capitalists.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that just the way that political system is set up, making you think that you have choice A or choice B, and that's the only two choices that you have, it blinds us to what the possibilities are. Because when Democrats, for example, are polled on the war in Gaza, or what's going on, the genocide in Gaza, they want it to end. The majority want it to end, but then there's no choice to vote for that. If you know what I'm saying. Well, there is, but
There is.
they are not aware. And I mean, how much
Yeah.
slandering do you have going on for people that do decide to vote third party? That
Mhm.
gets slandered and to the max.
Yeah.
People will put you
Yeah.
down.
But that's the places, where individual choices really can make a difference if there's a collective of us. And I think there is. It's just we've been so conditioned to think with this issue about this two-party system that that's the only way.
Yeah.
But again, like we were saying before, if everyone wanted to, if everyone who wanted someone who wasn't evil, like someone who didn't think the person they were voting for was just the lesser evil, if everyone did that, or if every Democrat wanted something different and actually voted for something different, we could really bring about change, because there are hundreds of thousands of us. I know that there are. So I think we have to start putting, in some ways, more trust in what are the impact that our individual decisions can make, because we did talk a little bit earlier and we didn't really get to it about how, like, how we can make a difference. Because one of the things I wanted to mention, that I talked about in the Toward Liberation blog that you mentioned, Alicia, is the global strike for Gaza, which started just this last Thursday, which literally we're being asked to, every Thursday moving forward, to not spend any money, to not schedule any payments, to not use public transportation, to not fuel or charge our cars. Individually, that doesn't make a lot of difference, but collectively, it really can. If collectively over time, we can show our power by disrupting economies once a week, that shows the elites the power that we have. And we could use that to leverage for things. And I think that's what we have to start doing. And we see that happen. We've seen successes through the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, sanctions movement. We've seen, as examples that people know about, we've seen an impact on Starbucks, for example. We've seen, unrelated to Gaza, but we've seen an impact on Target, because of their anti-DEI stance, where a collective of people individuals making decisions, but then forming a collective body of people who are literally harming industries. We've seen, because of the BDS movement against McDonald's, we've seen their profits take a significant hit. We've seen them close locations, all directly because of the BDS movement. So we know that that works. So there are things that, like, individual decisions that we can make. Particularly, what I've been more encouraged by recently is individual decisions we make about how we spend our money. And I think there is a collective or a critical mass within the movement of people supporting the boycott, divest, sanctions movement. And if people aren't familiar to that, you can go to bdsmovement.org to learn more about it.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say, where can we get more information on?
What was that again? I'm going to put that on the screen.
We should probably verify, because I'm not sure if it's .org.
I'll put it in the
Pretty sure.
description after, just to make sure.
Okay. It's BDS movement, and I'm pretty sure it's .org. You could also go, I would love for people to take a look at the blog post you mentioned, Alicia. It's towardliberation.com, the Fight the Real Enemy post. That has a bunch of links at the bottom of it, including the original call for a global strike every Thursday from a Palestinian journalist who posted about it on her Instagram. There's a link in my post to her Instagram video, so you could see that.
You said towardliberation.com?
Yep.
Yeah, these are things, like I said at the beginning, people are looking for places to put their energy.
Mm-hmm.
I think these are tangible things that we can start doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think we were talking earlier about how it can seem like overwhelming, you know, and absolutely, it really can. But I think we're really seeing successes in some of these economic boycotts. And there's academic boycotts too. Another thing that people can do if they're interested in being involved is follow Social Work for Palestine. We have a very small, bare bones website, but it's socialworkforpalestine.com. There's a platform statement on there about what we support. But the one thing that I think is powerful that we do is we hold power hours. They're not on a regular schedule right now. Sometimes they're weekly, sometimes they're every 3 or 4 weeks, but we do have a listserv that we send out information about them. We do have an Instagram, so that's how people can find out about our upcoming power hours. But we're going to be exploring, you know, a BDS movement within social work, like something that social workers can do to contribute to part of the BDS movement, which is boycotting schools that have collaborations with Israel, study abroad programs with Israel. One thing that I was thinking about that we might explore is one of the big BDS targets is HP, Hewlett Packard. So what if social workers can try within their orgs, within their schools, to get their institution, their organization, their nonprofit to not use Hewlett Packard products in their IT division? I mean, that's like a doable ask, you know, advocate for your IT department to not use Hewlett Packard products if that's what they're using. So there are these really tangible things that we can kind of latch onto and see differences made that way.
Yeah. Everybody needs to remember that the current world we live in revolves around money, but you do have purchasing power that can affect.
Absolutely.
Right. I'm so glad that we're bringing that up. And with all of these movements happening and building, do you have any hope for the next election, that people will see that there's other people that feel the same way?
I don't really have a hope for that. I do think that I have hope that other people, that many other people think just like we're thinking. I don't have hope that that all of those people are not going to vote for Democrats in the next election. I hope that a movement for that starts. I think, you know, looking at Zoran Mamdani in New York is something that shows a shift in electoral politics. You know, again, with the acknowledgement that electoral politics are not the solution to everything, But to the extent that they're going to still be around and make a difference, I think the case of Zoran Mamdani in New York shows a shift among voters, where a person who is openly socialist, openly against the genocide, won an election in a landslide. So what I do have hope for in this next election is that the issue of Palestine and the issue of the genocide will become a litmus test among Democrats. I don't think that a Democrat can win a primary being supportive of the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And so that's what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah, good point. That is a good point. I think that's where I'm seeing it too. There's more that are not going to support the genocide. And that's going to be a huge talking point.
Right. I think so. I think it will be the talking point. I really do in the next elections.
Yeah.
Within the Democratic primaries.
Right.
Yeah. If Kamala Harris were to run again, do you think that her tune would stay the same, or do you think she might change that based on losing the election and reflecting on why she lost?
I think that's why she lost. I don't know if that she surrounds herself with people that tell her that's why she's lost. So that's where I'm not sure. I don't know what her people and all of the people who supported her campaign, I don't know what they're telling themselves about why she lost. I don't know. I would hope that her position evolves on that. Having said that, though, I mean, to me, Kamala Harris was problematic in many ways besides her stance. I mean, Kamala Harris is literally a cop. Kamala Harris has done more harm to Black people in California through her policies as Attorney General than perhaps any other politician that's alive right now. So I think it's important that we remember that too.
Yeah.
When we're speaking about that particular politician.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I also worry that the changes in stances would be performative too, and would just be optics than actual genuine change in the view. So.
And I think a real source of whether it's performative or not is how much money they're taking from AIPAC.
Exactly.
Which is public record.
Easy to find. Go Google it.
Mm-hmm.
Be shocked at what you see if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as we are coming closer to the end of the podcast, if there's anybody else that has a question for Alan, wherever you are, do drop that in the chat.
I was wondering, I have just two quick questions, well, not two quick questions, but two questions. And one would just be if you have any bones you can throw to everybody about where you might get information. It's so hard to find unbiased information these days. I'm always trying to search for nonpartisan kind of news sources and things like that. That'd be one side. And then the other side of that would be, we were talking about the Black Panthers earlier in social work, and, like the way that they were, even Angela Davis, when I read her autobiography, the way that they organize is much different, obviously, than today. There was not the internet and cell phones and all of that kind of thing. But I think one of the difficult things today is, how do you organize and communicate with each other? Because we're so oversaturated with stuff everywhere. So many emails, so many people have podcasts, so many people have this or that. And I think that even if you have similar ideas or similar values, it can be hard to connect with each other because there's so much going on. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts or insight on that, is how do we take like what they were doing, it's similar to like the Black Panther movement and the way that they did social work, and how can we get there today? And like, again, there's so many people doing great things. It just seems like we're still disconnected, although we have the capability to connect more than ever, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I mean, I can answer the first one first because that's a little easier. I think to the extent that people, watching your show are listening to corporate-backed news sources. I mean, I think it's important to talk about that reality, that you're just not getting the truth if you're watching MSNBC, if you're reading the New York Times, any kind of corporate-backed news. So I think looking for independent news sources is important. I think Democracy Now! Is probably one of the go-tos for a lot of people. It's Democracy Now! Again, I'm not sure if it's .org or .com, but Democracy Now! You can Google that easily. They have a nightly YouTube news broadcast. There's usually two versions, one that's like a 10-minute headline version and then one that's more like an hour-long version. I also really like a show called Breaking Points, which has Crystal Ball, who's probably more on the progressive side of the left, and then another man, Sagar and Jetty, who's more on the right of things. But what I like about their show is that they kind of talk about the way we started talking this podcast about how the elites try to pit us against each other. And so their kind of idea is that rather than it being right and left fighting against each other, we should all be fighting against the elites who control society. But they really present a lot of news that you won't hear on corporate-backed news and really take the time to delve deeply into a lot of important topics, what's happening in Palestine being one of them that they talk about almost nightly. So those are two things that I rely on a lot. How to get together. I think that's a challenge because of everything that you just mentioned. We're so saturated with information and so many people have podcasts, blogs, Substacks. We as I hear people, one thing I'll mention is I hear people talk about the idea, like, do those of us who are not supportive of something like NASW, should we think about starting some kind of structure for us within social work where we could all connect? So then it's not an issue-based thing, like it's not a social work for Palestine or it's not something, but it's social workers who want to be revolutionary, social workers who are abolitionists, a place where we can get together. Maybe that's something that we need to start thinking about more seriously. Again, the challenge to that is it adds another email, another thing that we have to follow. But maybe there's a way to think about it as a collective. Oh, one thing I'll put out a shout out for is, because this is actually what we're trying to do. There's a social work activist collective. It's their website is swactivists.com. But Google Social Work Activist Collective. That is what it was founded for. I'm one of the members of that group that puts on some political education sessions, usually once a month. We'll be starting back up this fall. But the idea of that group was to kind of be a go-to source for all of the various movements happening in social work. So rather than being a movement itself, it's just a place for people to go to and connect. And if you want to get involved in abolitionism, if you want to get involved in union backing, this is the place where you could go and find out and connect with what's happening with people. So usually what we do, we have monthly meetings, and we alternate between one that's about some topic of political education, and then the other ones, the bi-monthly ones, are just a check-in for people. And we have we break up into breakout rooms by region of the country, so people can learn about actions and things that are happening in that region and get involved if they want. So to learn more about places where you can plug in if you want to, that's a good place to get started too.
That's great.
Yeah,
and I wasn't aware of that. Happy to share that with my students.
For sure.
One seed I wanted to plant, Alan, was, have you ever been to Hawaii before?
I haven't been to Hawaii. No, I would love to.
Well, we are trying to manifest, I don't want to call it a retreat, but a small kind of gathering with whatever we want to call ourselves, revolutionary social workers. We have an amazing piece of land that we live on right now that would be able to host something like that. And I just wanted to plant that seed, and you'll be getting a email or something from us at some point. That
would be awesome. Yeah, I would love to be there. Would love it.
Yeah.
I think we can keep it cost effective and everything. So look out for that.
That's great.
And then another thing we're going to do is, so one of the things that my students have loved is another thing that was, I'd say, like right in alignment with the way Angela Davis affected me, is that when I first went into social work education, somehow I got to be a part of this thing called the Rural Human Services Program in Alaska, like over 10 years ago. And I was the only white person. I was the only non-native person. And I don't even know how, to this day, I don't know how I got in there.
but it was all of the coursework was facilitated via talking circles with Indigenous elders. And at first I hated it. I was like, I got other shit to do. I'm hungry. I got homework to do. But then when I spent time in there, it transformed me to a level I can't even state. And I've since, it's actually what my dissertation project on, which I'm finishing up soon, but I've implemented them into my courses, even if they're online asynchronous and meet and have talking circles where folks can talk. We can talk about issues like this, but we can also just unburden our hearts. My mentor, grandmother Rita, would say, you can't learn effectively if you have carrying around a burden on your heart. And so just having the talking circle where the main act you do is listening to everybody else, it's been really profound in the way that it shapes my classes and the students. So we're going to try to open those up to a wider, my students want me to open them up to other social workers in the future. So that's another thing that will be coming soon. And I hope that I have high hopes for that the biggest thing that I hear from students and social workers is that we're disconnected. They want connection. And so anything that we can, things that you're doing, the talking circles, us gathering, reconnecting to ourselves, to each other, to community. That's what it's all about in my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea for, I've been teaching the last couple of years, all of my courses online asynchronous. So I love that idea of trying to integrate that into there, because I'm still like developing my skills in that model of teaching.
I'll send you an invite if you ever want to come and check it out.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I'd love it.
We have them Thursdays at noon Alaska time. Where are you at in Texas?
Houston, so Central Time.
That's what, like 3 p.m. maybe?
Yeah.
3 p.m. on Thursdays. But I'll send you an invite.
Okay, that would be great. Appreciate it.
But what's really cool about that, because these are asynchronous classes, and so you don't even make them mandatory.
No, it's voluntary. Right? So they still come. I'm getting a large group of students. I used to hold them twice a week. Sometimes they come both times. Some students come every single time, and it's just really hard. It's filled up my heart, to be honest with you, and just to see the way they show up for each other as well.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Heard, and they want to support each other. So it's
And you could potentially go through an entire social work program without much interpersonal situations because you're just doing online asynchronous work. You know what I'm saying?
For sure.
Get to a practicum and you haven't even talked to anybody before that.
Absolutely.
There's some humans, but
no, I really like that idea. That's great.
Thank you.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about before we cut it off? Anything we didn't get to?
I think we covered everything. I appreciate you sharing all those links. Go to towardliberation.com. And I'd love for people to get involved in there. So I don't know that we mentioned really what it is. It's a free Substack, but it's designed as a abolitionist reading learning group. So every month we read a book. Sometimes it's not a book. Sometimes it's like a graphic novel. Sometimes it's a series of essays or like an online blog or something like that. And then we get together on Zoom at the end of the month and discuss. And so over the summer we read Tip of the Spear by Orasami Burton, and he was able to join us just this last week for the talk. Next month's book is called Scrap Theory. It's about Black feminism and reproductive justice, and the author of that book's agreed to join us. So you can go to towardliberation.com and just sign up. It's a free Substack. Go to upinmovement.org to learn more about that. And I would love people to learn more and get involved in BDS, and that's bdsmovement.org.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much.
And I'll try to get all those links in the description and all that. So
awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. This was really great.
Our pleasure.
Thanks. Just thank you to you, Alan. Just thanks for taking your time today and being, kind and generous with that. But also just thank you for being you. I appreciate you. I look up to you. And
I appreciate
you empower me, people like me, to do something different and to be willing to do more than we're doing.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And everybody in the audience, if you did drop a question or you're just listening, thank you. And that's a wrap for this episode. Alan, have a great rest of your weekend. And
thank you. I appreciate it. Y'all too. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.